let's see. Goal for today, I want to go over the 4 pillars of object-oriented programming because I've been kind of alluding to them yesterday, but I want to like kind of explicitly call them out and give things names and talk about them a little bit more concretely. And then we're going to talk about composition versus inheritance, and add a little bit more functionality to our little store, and add some products. And then at the end, I want to talk about the adventure game, and if people have any questions about it, we can go over those, or if someone has a problem or a bug they're trying to work through, we can talk about that. So let's just to get a gauge, respond with emoji. How are you feeling about OP, just in general? Multiple inheritance is when a class inherits from multiple classes, multiple parent classes, which is basically what it sounds like. And I think most typically object-oriented classes don't allow multiple inheritance, but Python does, which is partially why this super can get kind of confusing. Okay, we got a whole range of emojis. Confused at first is definitely a thing. I'm curious why meh about object, is that like from an understanding point of view, or about if you like it or not? Both, yes. Okay, well, if you have questions, definitely keep asking questions, and hopefully the discussion around the 4 pillars of will maybe provide some more insight about why object-oriented is used in industry. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. And this conversation is about the 4 pillars. It's mostly like a vocab thing. So if you can remember the terminology, that's great, but it's more important to remember the concepts behind it. But does anyone know what the 4 pillars are? Or if anyone wants to guess? Yep. There's encapsulation, abstraction, polymorphism, and inheritance. Nice, guys. So what is encapsulation? Encapsulation is basically, we talked about this, it's the bundling of data, all of the data and functionalities in one class, and it's hiding the implementation details from the user. So this is hiding implementation details from the user. So as an example, if we look to the store class from yesterday, whoops, I changed it. I was messing with this. Can I undo everything? So we originally had this line as store.departments of user input -1, right? Store dot. And why is this why is this poor encapsulation? Can anyone venture a guess or explain why this is suboptimal. Yeah, it's not hiding it. Uh, it's requiring the user to know that departments is stored as a list. Um, and this is bad because it's more things the user has to keep track of. But in the future, say we want to change how we store departments, and maybe we want to change it to a set or a map or something completely else. We won't, if we wanted to change how we store departments in the future, this line will break. And then we have to like, it will be a breaking change, and then our user will have to upgrade, and it's just not fun. So what would be a better way of, so that's why this is like poor encapsulation. What would be a better way of doing this, of getting the corresponding department? The user, so this is saying, because we're accessing the department with by the index, it's dependent on store.department being a list. And that's an implementation detail. Grab the input in the most basic way. Yeah, something like that. Sorry, I keep trying to figure out what the best zoom. What I would suggest is actually adding a method on the store class to get the department based on the user input. So what we could do is something like def get department by ID, self, and then department ID. And then we can in here return self.departments department ID -1. And then now, instead of accessing departments directly, we can just call get department by ID, and then pass in the user input. And then in the future, if we want to change self.departments to anything else, we just have to change how we implement this, but it doesn't impact the user at all. So any questions about encapsulation? Basically, yeah. A lot of object-oriented is about managing complexity. So reducing complexity, reducing the user headache, because a lot of times when we say user in this case, we really mean like other developers or ourselves. So it would be nice if I could not have to change. Yeah, it is a little bit about how you manage your functions / methods. It's basically, so right, it also has to do with public and private variables, which Python has a very loose conception of, and that was also covered in your training kit. So yeah, so definitely read up about public-private variables. In Python, you can just suggest a variable is private by adding an underscore in front of it. But the key idea is we don't want people to have to depend on us implementing departments as a list. Because if we later want to change that, it causes headache wherever we're using that or depending on that implementation. Specific class and can't be used out. Yeah, so in other programming languages, when you have a private variable, you literally can't access it outside of the class. So that's like really strong protection, or a stronger form of encapsulation. In Python, we can suggest that this is a private variable, and you shouldn't mess with it or access it directly. And in fact, if out here I try to access it directly, my IDE gives me let's say departments. My IDE gives me a warning that we're trying to access a protected member. And a lot of times we'll instead have setters and getters for your private variables or private variables. And so you have that kind of extra layer of protection between the implementation and how people use your class. So if encapsulation is about hiding implementation details, what is abstraction? I feel like they're very similar, but there's no slight difference. So the double underscore does a little bit more like name mingling on the variables. Usually I would say I haven't seen the double underscore variable that much in practice, but you can definitely read about it more in the training kit. Yeah, exactly, Eric. It makes it a little bit more private, but can still be accessed. Private. Any other questions on encapsulation, private variables, etc.? Yeah, so if you wanted getters and setters, you can just do, so I made departments private, and then we can just do def get departments and return self dot departments and def set departments. Self departments and then self dot departments equals whatever you need to put there. So if you do want to like modify departments before getting your setting, you can do that there. And there's also a property keyword that is kind of handy for this. Yeah, what Eric just posted. So I'm going to move on to abstraction. Encapsulation is about hiding the implementation details, so that you can change the implementation without affecting where that class is called. Abstraction is also a way of managing complexity, but it's more of a design decision. It's about like choosing the right level of details for the use case. So for example, in our store class, when we were first brainstorming, we came up with a bunch of different classes that we might want to create. And we were talking about registers or employees or maybe like a location. And those are all things that an actual store would have. But for our use case, where we just wanted to browse the departments, it was too much detail. So it was the wrong level of abstraction. We wanted to kind of pare it down a bit and only expose the store name and the departments at that point. So that's basically abstraction. It's like things in real life are very complicated, but we kind of simplify them so that they're easier to understand and so that we can use them without having to understand every single detail about them. Does that make sense? Yeah. Who can tell me about polymorphism? Where have we seen polymorphism already? Yeah, it means many different forms, kind of changing an object to another object, and it is related to inheritance. Polymorphism is basically a function being able to, it's when a function can behave differently based on the object. So let me actually pull out this graphic. So this is a pretty common example, but suppose we have this shape class and we want to be able to draw the shape. And then we have a circle class, a rectangle class, and a square class that are all inheriting from shape. But they implement their own draw methods because the way you draw a circle might be different from the way you draw a rectangle. So now we can create just a list of any shape or a list of shapes, circle, rectangle, and square, and call draw on each of them. And the correct draw method will get called based on if it was a circle or a shape or a rectangle. But we don't, so it's basically the class can be treated either as its parent class or its subclass. So an object can be treated either as its parent class or the subclass. So in this case, we could be inheriting the draw method, or we can override it, and then when we call on the object, the correct draw method will execute. So it's similar to when we were overriding the stir method on waypoint and geocache. That was an example of polymorphism. Any other questions on polymorphism? Yeah, it's methods that can take a different object and work with it, basically. With our store, well, yeah, I'll show an example of it when we start adding products. Um, yeah, because it's inheritance, but and a lot of times when you have inheritance, you'll also override a method to get polymorphism, but polymorphism can also exist outside of inheritance. And speaking of which, we've talked about this already, so can anyone explain what inheritance is? Yeah, I like that, Matthew. Formation given by a parent to their child, where parents pass down to children information and functions, or money, yes. But yeah, it's basically parents pass down information, so attributes and functions to the child class. And inheritance is one way to reuse code if you have a lot of very similar um, objects, classes. So I feel like I went through those pretty quickly. And conceptually, they're kind of vague and not super well defined. But as we keep going, I'll try to point out when we're like seeing encapsulation or abstraction. Um, Inheritance hell. I well, I think I don't know what inheritance hell in CSS is specifically, um, but when you have a long chain of inheritance, it does get very annoying, um, and that actually leads to um, another form of object relation and another way you can reuse code, which we'll talk about in a second. But any leftover questions about this so far? Okay, I'll I'll try to keep pointing out um, like examples of these four things as we keep going. But now I want to talk, using our store as an example, talk a little bit more about inheritance versus composition. So right now in our store, we just have these two classes, right? We have department and store. And on Monday, we had a little bit of discussion about whether or not department should inherit from store. And we decided not, because a department isn't technically a store. But that doesn't mean that there isn't like a relationship between them, right? Um, so let's see. Let me zoom in on this because that is extremely small. How do I hide this? Sorry, guys. So right now, I'm just modeling our store and category classes. But what would we call the relationship, or how would we describe the relationship between them? Because there is a relationship. They're cousins. Any other ventures while I try to figure out how to. How do I find this? Yeah, it is one to many. Aggregation. Yeah, header. That's a header throughout aggregation. Can you explain what you mean by that? It's absolutely right, but or it's close. Yeah, where one can exist without the other. And aggregation is, I guess we actually call these categories departments, didn't we? Aggregation is a form of composition, or you might also hear it called association. I don't know. Okay. And kind of colloquially, we know that this relationship is composition because we can say the store has a department. Um, so this is like a has a relationship is another way you might hear it referred to. Whereas inheritance would be and is a relationship. So if, for example, we had a different kind of store that was uh, um, like a grocery store that was inheriting from store, we would say, why is that not clicking? We would say that the grocery store is a store. So the key terms here are, or the key things to remember here are that inheritance is when something is inheriting, we say class A is a class B. Whereas when the relationship is composition or aggregation, we say class A has a class B. And there's a slight distinction between if two things can exist without the other. So in this case, you could have a store and we can have a separate department, but the store can also have a department, versus where one thing is can't exist without the other. So for example, a human class and a heart class. Yeah, or you can have an office with different departments. Um, so now let's say we want to start adding products into our store. So let's see, what were the products? So our departments are Python, CS, data science, React. What are some products you might want to add? Yeah, we might want to have laptops, IDEs, languages, maybe like textbooks, courses, browsers, t-shirts. Yeah, so a whole different range of products, of types of products that we would want to create. But if you were to try to create a product, an actual product class, and I'll just create it here for now. what would be the attributes that go inside of it? Name and price, product type, name, price. Yeah, I think name, price, description all kind of fit. Maybe variance, maybe not yet. So we can initialize those first. Self dot price equals price. I have a typo somewhere. Oh, there's my typo. And self dot description equals description. But then there are so many other attributes on these individual product types that aren't covered by these, right? So for example, on laptops, what are different attributes you might want to have on laptops? Yes, space, keyboards, memory, size, brand, exactly, CPU, screen, OS, definitely, so on and so forth. You get the idea. And same thing with for IDE. What are different attributes you would want to include on an IDE product? Yeah, extensions, language, extensions, dark mode. You kind of get the point. So how do we actually create products that allow for all of these different attributes? We can create a laptop class and then have it inherit from product. So now, okay, I'm just going to choose brand, CPU, and memory, because otherwise that's a lot of attributes. And then we can also have name, price, description. So now we have laptop inheriting from product. So how do we call the parent class init function? Thank you. Super.init. And there was a little bit of confusion about this. Last time we don't need to pass in self because that gets kind of added in automatically. So we just pass in name, price, and description. And then for ourselves, we can set the laptop specific attributes. Self.cpu. I don't know if that should be lowercase or uppercase. I'm gonna make it lowercase. And self.memory equals memory. And then we can do the same thing for IDEs. And at this point, this is getting kind of cluttered. So I'm actually going to move this into a separate file. If I can copy and paste. Not close, but not quite. Let's call this product.py. So the parameters we're passing in here are the parameters we would need to pass in to the parent class's constructor. So even if we didn't want to use the super description, maybe we wanted to say like self.description equals description.upper to be really loud. We would still need to pass in description here, because if we didn't, well, actually, let's try this. laptop equals laptop. Someone give me a name. What's a name for a laptop? It is similar to prototypes in JavaScript. MacBook, price, ooh, let's say 1,000, description, super sleek laptop, brand, Apple, CPU. And I'm just gonna test none and none for right now. But let's see, CV store, the Python product.py. So now, even though if we don't pass in description, we get an error. Even though we don't want what super does with the description, we want to do something else, or even if we didn't care about description at all. So yeah, the parameters you pass to the parent class in construction are just what you would have to pass in if you were calling the parent class directly. Is there a way to print the method super and see what exactly it passes down? I don't know. What you could do is just look at the, I mean, you know which class you're inheriting from, so you could look at that, but I don't know if there's like a programmatic way. So let's make a couple more product classes. So what other class do we want to make? Here was our list of suggestions. IDE. Yeah, let's go with IDE. And so again, same syntax. And we said language extensions. So we need name, price, description, language extensions, dark mode. So super.init, same thing, name, price, and description. And then self.language equals language, self.extensions equals extensions, self.dark mode equals dark mode. So now we have two different child products and inheriting from our parent product. And now the kind of cool thing about inheritance is we could, what if at one point we said we wanted to add a discount? So self.discount, and we can set to 0. Now, if we run this, laptop will have a discount on it. Or maybe let's say everything is on discount for, I don't know, $10. Even though we didn't explicitly set the discount on the laptop. Okay, so since you need to pass the parent as the param in the class, can that be done using an import? Yeah, you totally could. So I could keep product there and then make a new Python file. This is really, really bad naming, but more products. And then I can just, from product, import product. And it's giving me an error, but let's try Python or products. And it still works. My IDE is just being stupid right now. Um, yeah, thanks, Eric. Can you show an example of adding more than one laptop? Yeah, so then we can have, you should maybe call this one MacBook, and then let's call Acer equals laptop, Acer, I don't know how much are Acers now. Acer laptop. Wow. None. None. Okay, I guess it's okay. I think, wow, really just, okay, so then we create both a MacBook and an Acer, and we can, and let's actually create an IDE. So I'm going to create PyCharm because that's what I use. So we have IDE. I'm using the community version, so it's free. Community version. Yeah, none is a placeholder. And I'm going to finish this, but community version of PyCharm, language, let's say Python, extensions, dark mode, true. So now we can have all products, and we can have the list of MacBook, Acer, and PyCharm, and then for product and products, we can print, let's see, product.name, product.price. Okay. Any questions about any of that so far? It probably shouldn't have started this. Okay, so the empty bracket, yeah, I'm saying dark mode. This is a little bit confusing, but I'm assuming dark mode is like a Boolean for um, or if it supports dark mode. This is extensions. I could also do extensions. Yeah. But that's actually a good question. What if we wanted to make some of these optional? How would we do that? So let's say we wanted to make extensions in dark mode optional, default. Yeah, so what's the syntax for that? Mm-hmm. Extensions equals none, dark mode equals none. If it was a list, you could do, you could also do an empty list. A lot of times we'll also see like, because lists are mutable, you'll see extensions equals none, and then here you'll do extensions if extensions else. That, and this is the same, if extensions is provided, use that, otherwise make it an empty list. And if you're curious more about that, you can look up Python default arguments list. Yep, you totally can. So let's do extensions equals, I don't know, A, B, C, and then we can do extensions here. Okay, so let's bring this back to our store, and I'm just going to copy this over. That's the things the Lord would do. Um, data. Okay, you want me to. Right, so here extensions. Oh, are you asking if we could set like extensions here and then set extensions equals extensions? Was that the question? Yeah, you could do that, but in general, it's bad practice to make a default argument um, a set a mutable object or data structure as a default argument. So more typically, what you would do is like set that to none, and then here set um, outside extensions. Yeah, it gets complicated. Yeah, or you would just like set it here directly. And it's because this default only gets set the first time. So then if it's a mutable thing and then you change it later, um, you're changing the default, which might be unexpected. It's you can do it, it's just not great practice. I think I feel like I lost a couple of questions, but why don't we take a break, and then when we come back, we'll add the products into our master store program. So let's do 5 minutes. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Um, to answer Andrew's question, setting something that's a list that can be altered and the default values would be redundant because it will be harder to manipulate later, right? Um, basically, yeah. I'm actually going to drop this link, which I think explains it really well. But basically, the default arguments are only evaluated once at the beginning and not each time. So if you mutated, remember, because lists are passed by reference. So if you mutate the default list, it's mutated forever. And then that will lead to headaches later. So that's why most of the time, if you need an optional list argument, you set it to none and then do something like this. Any other questions about that? Okay, so I'm going to delete all of that and let's start actually adding the products to our store. So we have products. I'm just going to import these. Um, so we have them imported from at the top there. But right now we're not. They're not. The product class isn't really referenced anywhere. So what class should we add products on? Department? Yeah, I think so. So let's add a list of products here. And then we can say self.products equals products. So then now we have to add our list of products here. So for Python, let's say PyCharm is a product. For CS, I don't know, maybe MacBook. I'm just very arbitrarily, maybe I'll do Acer. I guess a product can belong to multiple departments. React doesn't have any products. And then let's say when we print a department, we want to print out all of the department, all of the products. So let me run store.py for now. Store is not a package. Oh, I think this needs to import from more products. And let's try that. Cool. So if we choose the Python department, right now it just says we chose department Python, and we want to make it print out a list of all of the products in that department. So how do we do that? We can, does anyone have thoughts? Yeah. Okay. So if you're once we choose a department, we want to print out the products in the department. So how do we do that? I'm going to say, let's start off by pulling this out. And then here we can just call that department. And then let's just try print department dot products. And we haven't implemented put yet, so let's do that next. Yep, so we made this get department by ID, which is just indexing into the list. But we haven't made one for getting the products from the department. So now let's print one, and we get this weird thing because we need to implement. It has no, well, this is because we neglected to implement the double underscore stir. So, yep. So let's just on here stir, and let's return self.name and self.price. And let's just do just that much for now. To CS that, okay. And I think need to do maybe for product and department dot products print product. Let's try that. And now that's working. So we have IDE 0 print product. Did we call the IDE just IDE? Let's call that pie chart. One thing that's annoying me is we haven't implemented this queue to quit. So let's just do a check there. If user input equals queue, we can break. And try running that. One, using two CS, we got MacBook and Acer. And for, so this is a little bit weird that we don't get the products if they're missing. And then queue to quit. Anything else we should add to this? Error checking, yeah. So right now, if I put in 89, I get a list indexed out of range. And I agree. We should, I'm just going to say to do if there are no products, print a nice statement. And I'm also just going to throw in a new line for readability, but then error checking. So there's a couple of ways we can do that. Right now, we're getting the list index out of range. So what we could do is explicitly check if int user input is greater than store length of store dot departments. We can say print, please choose a valid ID, department ID, and continue. Why is this maybe not optimal? why would we not want to compare user input? Yeah, we're accessing a private or a protected attribute on store. So what's something else we could do? We could use some sort of get function. Another thing that we can do is just wrap the whole thing in a try catch. And I don't know if we've talked about this yet, but we can try and then accept. And in this case, it's an index error. My guess is pretty much as E, we can say print, please enter a valid department ID, and then continue. We actually don't even need a continue statement though. Yeah, so if anyone's unfamiliar with this try except, basically when we enter the incorrect ID, this was throwing an error. Specifically, it was throwing an index error. So now if it throws an index error, we'll print this message. So this is catching that error. And we can try that. And we get this, please enter a valid department ID. And we can catch any error as exception. And then my IDE will tell me that's poor form because it's too broad of an exception class. But if you can also do multiple accepts. So for example, if we input something that's not an integer, so we get a different type of error, value error that we didn't explicitly catch. So we can add that. I think that's the syntax. Let's see, what's the syntax for this? Python catch multiple exceptions. Okay, so it wants a parenthesized tuple. So we can do index error, value error. We can do 3. We can do something that's invalid, and we get please enter a valid department ID. We can do something that's not an integer, and we get please enter a valid department ID. And then we can quit. Yeah. We can also use an if clause. So if we wanted to handle these errors differently, we could do like if type E is index error and do stuff. But more commonly, what I see is you would do except index error, do stuff, and then accept value error. You can do stuff. Yeah, so you can do just accept value error, or if you do as E, we can actually even just log the exception. If, for example, this was something not user facing and we wanted to log it. That's a value error, so, and we can access the error like that. But that's probably not what we want for something that is user facing. It's, yeah, logging, it's the logging module, and it will log to either standard error or standard out, or you can route it to log to a file. It's complicated, but basically it's the logging module. Any other questions? Let's say, yeah, any questions on any of this? Cool. Um, and then here we can say, if not department.products, print, there are no products in this department, else. And then just to show off like polymorphism, if for suppose we wanted to override the string method on, let's say, IDE, we could return maybe even super dot string. Let's say let's say if self dot dark mode, we can return f super dot string supports dark mode, else we just return the vanilla. And then in here, let's create, let's set dark mode equals true, and maybe IntelliJ for Java and dark mode equals false. So now PyCharm and IntelliJ have an overridden string method. So if we were now to print out all of these products, what would we expect? I just did that really quickly, so let me open up more products. So if we print out the MacBook, Acer, PyCharm, and IntelliJ, what do we expect to happen? Yeah, the true one says supports dark mode. So let's try that out. And okay, so what's the bug here? Does anyone have a guess what I did wrong? Yeah, but we did implement stir because this is calling, because we have the stir on the MacBook and the Acer, which are inheriting from product. Didn't use super correctly. Getting closer. Yeah, exactly. I didn't call the stir method. So when I left off the parentheses, you can see we were getting a bound method, product.stir of, and then this was the super, the return from super. So let's try this again. And now we get PyCharm supports start mode, which is what we wanted. So that's just another example of polymorphism where we're calling the stir method on all of these products, but and they're all products, but PyCharm, because it's an IDE and Java, the stir method that we wrote on the subclass took precedence. Okay. Anything else we want to add on this? We have error handling. We have printing. We could add more functionality. But yeah, I'm actually feeling pretty good about this. So one, the ability to go back to departments. Yeah, I think like what we could do is maybe, I don't know if this is what you meant, Dalton, but like once you get a department, kind of browse the product more. So like be able to say, I want to look at all of the details on PyCharm, and then also go back to departments. That's definitely something we could add. Yeah, let me do that. Why don't we also take a break? So I'll open up all three files so that those are up while we take the break. Let's see. To opposite group, and will that work? This is the store. And this is the product class here. And I will definitely drop all of this code after class. So let's say 5-minute timer. I cannot make this full screen and also have a 5-minute timer going on. So I'll make it slightly smaller. Yeah, I'm on the East Coast. So my clock is weird. And I'll see you guys back here in Okay, welcome back, everyone. Um, Andrew, I actually grew up near DC in Fairfax, um, so around the same area. Can you print at line 100 here? That, okay, yeah. This was actually something that was not working. I think I really just wanted an extra line because it was, or maybe it was working. I can't tell. I wanted an extra line because it was hard to tell when one iteration of the cycle was stopping or starting. Um, so yeah, it was just that line break there, the print on 100. Any other questions on that? Any of this? Okay. If not, I want to kind of change focus and start looking at the adventure game project. So actually, I'm gonna drop a pulley. How are you doing on the adventure game? And let's say yet finished day 1 MVP, started day 2 MVP. I have some questions. Enable. Just to get a gauge of how you guys are doing and what would be more useful. Almost day 1 MVP. Okay. Yeah, so we're in the department class, isn't so yeah, good question. The department class isn't inheriting from the product class, right? So if we take a look at it, so department isn't inheriting from anything. Um, that being said, what is the relationship between department and product? Yeah, so we say department has a product. So that's composition. Um, exactly. The only thing that inherits from product are the IDE and laptop classes. Any other questions? Complete. A couple of people are completely lost. Some and 6 have some questions. And someone hates it, which I'm sorry, but hopefully we can clear things up today. So what are the questions on the, what are people's questions on the adventure game? I'm going to close every I know people have questions. Where would I start? Yeah, maybe will it be helpful for us to just kind of go through the like understand and plan step for the project together, and just talk about how would we actually get started on this? How to start and where to start. Okay, cool. I can definitely do that. Let's see, where did I have it? Give me a moment to pull it up. So I'm going to go back to the thread to save screen space. And actually I have it checked out, so intro to Python 2. Let's look at this README. So blah, 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 up to this point, what we're building. So just focusing on the day one MVP, we want to create the input command parser and adv.py, which allows the program to receive player input and commands to move to rooms in the 4 cardinal directions and fill out the player and room classes in player.py and room.py. Okay, just starting out, that might not mean too much, but what I would do is first start opening up these files, right? So we kind of looked at this together, but this is the main entry point. And then player.py and room.py are just completely empty aside from these comments. So 2 things I know, I need to implement this. I don't know quite yet what needs to go in there, and I need to implement this. And then I need to create the input command parser. And if you read the specification, so the source directory contains all of these files, so which is where the main logic for the game should live. And then room.py, which will contain the definition of the room class, and player.py, which will contain the definition of the player class. And we want to add a REPL parser to adv.py that accepts directional commands to move the player. After each move, the REPL should print the name and description of the player's current room. Valid commands are north, south, east, west, and the parser should print an error if the player tries to move where there is no room. So I'm going to comment and paste this in here, just so I have it all in one place. But let's first try to understand what this adv.py file is doing. So we're importing room from room, and then we're declaring all the rooms. So we have this outside room so we have this dictionary of room, which for me feels like this is actually dictionary of rooms, mapping a name to a room object. And it seems like room has a name and a description. So I know at some point I'm going to start my plan down here. First things first, I probably want to start create room class with name and description. And then here, this file is linking the rooms together. So I think this is a little bit confusing, the way this is happening. Yes, definitely. But basically, we're starting to draw a map of these different rooms. So if we start with this outside room, I'm just going to call it out. And we're saying this outside room has an N2. So north to outside is this foyer. This is, yeah. And then the same thing we have to do for the foyer. These are all like bidirectional, right? So we have the south too. And then we do the same thing north of the foyer is the overlook. I'm not gonna write out the whole thing, and so on and so forth. It's a dictionary that is holding each instance of a class as a key value pair, correct? Yeah, exactly. So, so this room outside is, we're indexing into the dictionary room, and getting the room that corresponds to the outside key, which is an actual room object. So that's how we're setting everything up. And then we need to make a new player object. So adding to my, so the other thing is the rooms are already linked. And then we need to create a player object. So I'm just going to quickly do those two first. Thank you, Brendan, for that screenshot. So def room, def, and what am I doing? Init, and we have name and description. Self.name equals name, self.description equals description. That's a class. Typing too fast here. Self, and then same thing for player. Def init self. And we don't really know what else needs to go in here except for what room they currently are in. Self.current room equals current room. And again, I'm just going to give myself this type hint. If this is confusing, you can ignore this, but I'm just going to remind myself that this is like an actual room object. That's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to from room import room. And cool. So then here, we want to make a new player object that was currently in the outside room. So we can say player equals player, and we want to give it put him in the outside room. So let's import that, and current room is outside. So there's a choice here. I could either put in the key outside, but I had kind of arbitrarily decided here that I would store the actual room itself in the player. So if I put outside, I'd be storing the key in this dictionary, but I want to store the actual room, so I get that by indexing into the dictionary. And then let me clear all of that. So I'm actually not storing the room as a string, I'm storing the actual room. Yep. And I think that leads to some confusion. And then we want to write a loop that does all of this. So very similarly, when we write a loop, we can just do the same while true, and then print the current room name. So print, how do we get the current room? We want the current room that the player is in. So how do we access that? Yeah, we can do player.current room. And specifically, let's and then we want to print the current. So we want to separately print the name and the description. So let's do name and then print player.current room dot description. And then we wait for user input. So user input equals, what's the function for this to get input from the user on the command line? Yep, we've seen this before. And say, let's say, choose a direction to move in. And then let's just try that much. So running this, we start in the outside cave entrance, and there's the north of us, the cave Mount beckons, which is the correct description. And then we can choose a direction to move in. We might want to be a little bit more explicit about what the directions are, and just make that a little bit more nicely formatted. So let's move north, and right now we're not actually doing anything. So going forward in our plan, we have, if the user enters a cardinal direction, we attempt to move to the room there. Otherwise, we print an error message, and if the user enters Q, quit the game. So hopefully that is that helpful in just in terms of getting started. What are some of the remaining questions? Name, yeah. How do we actually move? And we can talk about how do we move. Jesse, make sure you're importing player. You want to import the player from player like that. Yeah. Class instances are basically another data type. Yep. Yeah. It's what they're doing with the room is kind of sneaky, Matthew, and I'm not a huge fan of it. And if we want it to be this, so yeah, this is just a type hint. I can get rid of it completely and nothing changes, but it's just for me to remember that this is a room object. So in here, when we create the player, I'm passing in a room object as opposed to just the string. But functionally doesn't really do anything. I am not importing room from, well, I should. Yeah, so now, so let's actually do this two ways. I'm going to do a player 1 and a class player 2. And one is going to be the room and one is the string. So if this is player 1 and then player 2, and let me move this so we can look at both of them at the same time. Equals player 2, and this is just outside. When I here, when I get the current room from player 1, well, let's just try this. Sorry, from player 2. If I try to do that, let me oh. So for player 1, I can get the current room dot name, but for player 2, I get string object has no attribute name. And that's because in player 2, we're storing the room as the key into the dictionary. Exactly. So if I wanted to get the actual room object, I would have to index into the dictionary, right? So this room is referring to this room dictionary, and then this returns the actual room object. And now if you try to run it, it works. And for me, this just seems like a lot of extra bookkeeping to keep track of, which is why I defaulted to storing the room as opposed to the string. Are there any questions about that? Yeah, it's a little confusing. And if you wanted to, instead of storing them in a dictionary, you could just actually say like create variables directly equals room. And then you don't even have this like key versus object dilemma. Yeah, and Bunky, we don't actually need this. That was, it's called Titans. Tim, you probably want to mark the directory as a sources root. Any other questions? I'll delete that. Anything you want me to talk about or go over again? You guys are funny. What else would be helpful to go over? Do we want to talk through? Can you? Yeah, has adder is a pretty good way of doing it. You can also just throw a bunch of if statements at it, like we did with in rock paper scissors. How the rooms are linked. That's a really yep, has adder and get adder. Um, let me talk about how the rooms are linked because it's a little bit tricky, but they're basically just selling, yeah, they're selling the room as an instance, as an attribute, right? So if I actually wanted to be more explicit, which honestly I do want to be, I would do something like self.end2. And when we're just starting out, it's done. Like, I don't want to include these in the constructor, but I can define these attributes, north, east, west. And then the other thing I can do is also, I can specify that these are also other rooms, right? So these are type hints again, but just as a way for me to remember, the self.end2 is pointing to another room. And then when I want to move, let's say, let's just do, I'll just do the north for now, and then we can talk about how to use has adder and get adder. So if user input equals north, we want to check if the end2 on is defined. So if what we can do is actually out here current room equals player1 dot current room, and then if current room dot end2 is not none, you could just do that, but if you want to be more explicit, you can do is not none. You move to it, and when we move, we're really just updating the current room on the player one. So we do player1 dot current room equals, and then what should we set the current room to? Yeah, Trevor, exactly. They use is not null or not current room. It's not. You want to do is not none. So you can either do this, which is none will evaluate to like a Boolean false. But if you want to be more explicit about it, you can do that. Which one you choose is kind of up to your preference. What's the starting room is outside. So when we move, we want to update the current room to, yeah, so it would be current room to whatever is north of the current room, if we're going north. And then we would just do this for moving south, east, and west. and also the else handle error. Um, so the kind of, yeah, you could also use try except. The kind of straightforward way. But then how does the program know what values match the cardinal directions? Yeah, so these all get set here. So what we're doing, so this is saying what room is north to outside. And then we need other logic here to map the user input n to this n2 attribute on the room. Does that make sense? Yeah, kind of. What are you confused about? Yeah, and you can also like rename these if you want. Um, yeah, it's not, so this is not taking the place of this. This is more just being explicit about the fact that these properties can exist. If I got rid of it, everything would still work, but my IDE is a little bit annoyed about it. So this is kind of just like maybe like a hint to someone if you were given room but not adv.py to say you have these attributes that you can use to link. Yeah, so these attributes, we're now kind of grouping these attributes in the room class. Yep. And then people were asking about has attr and get attr. So I just wanted to show that very quickly. So here we're kind of manually mapping north points to this and to attribute. But another way we can do it is if has attr, and if you look at this, has attr returns whether the object has an attribute with the given name. And this is done by calling get attr and catching it. So we could check if has attr the object, which is the current room, and n2. And then you might also, if we do it this way, you might also want to check that. Well, and then if we did it this way, we actually know that the attribute is defined, but it's equal to none. And then here, instead of using dot notation, we can get to player one dot current room equals get attr, which gets a named attribute from an object. Get attr x, y is the equivalent of x dot y. So we can do current room n2. And these two lines are the same thing, but the advantage of has attr is that you can now say like um, you can basically like the attribute equals user input plus 2, right? And then you don't have to have 4 if statements. For PyCharm, I forget I think I'm command and clicking or just command and hover. I don't know if VS Code supports that. Yeah, and that's also totally valid, Andrew. You could do this on the player class itself, which might actually make more sense and keep this main function a little bit cleaner. So we are just about at time. But so for tonight and tomorrow, we're basically going to continue working on this. So if you were feeling stuck, hopefully that helped kind of unstick you. And then for the day 2 MVP, we're basically adding an item class. So we want to make rooms able to hold multiple items, make the player able to carry multiple items, and add items to the game. So adding the item class and maybe different 1 or 2 or as many as you want different types of items. And then this get item name and drop item name commands to the parser. So basically you need to support entering commands that have 2 parts, 2 words instead of just 1. And if you have any if you have time, you can add on to the stretch goals. You can basically go as far as you want with this project. So it's kind of fun. I feel like this light source is cool. But any questions? Yeah. Okay. If there are no questions, you're free to go. And I believe there is like an instructor hour tomorrow. So for day 2, yeah, I'll put this back up. For day 2, we're maybe not necessarily functions, but you will want to add items. So you'll, similar to how we added products for categories, we'll want to add items. Cool. Yeah, so feel free to hop off, and there are the instructor hour tomorrow. If I think it's like an instructor AMA, so if you have any residual questions, it will be pretty informal, and you can come on in, or if you just want to hop in and listen. It's also not required, just to put that one out there as well. Uh, you would actually probably know better than me. I don't have my calendar open right now, but I'll confirm. Thanks, y'all. Have fun with the project.